Man, now that Christmas is over, I have to ask you all a very important question. Do you guys like jelly beans? Because if you do, then I have a jelly bean for you. A very, very nutty, powerful one. This is Omnath, Locus of All, another commander we're going to be building for the $15 deck challenge. The goal of this challenge is to have a commander that is $1 or under, and the 99 of your deck be $15 or under, and the price of the deck is snapshotted at the time you make it. This is Omnath. He is a 5-mana commander, and yes, we are going to be making a 5-mana commander work for under $15, and it is going to be a wild ride. If you don't know what Omnath does, he has a couple of abilities. The first one, the most important one, honestly, is if you have any unspent mana, that mana just converts into black instead. This is a carryover from the old green Omnath ability, and it lets you store mana forever, and it's going to be very important for our deck's strategy. The next part, and least important, but still pretty important to the effect, is at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card, and if it has 3 or more colored mana, then you can add 3 mana in any combination of the colors that are on that card, and then put the card in your hand. But if you don't reveal it, you still put the card in your hand. So basically, this is just a really, really consistent draw engine that sometimes makes us mana, every now and again. But let's go ahead and talk about what this deck's trying to do. I am making myself smaller. That's not what I meant to do. Let's talk about what this deck is trying to do. This deck's attempting to have big mana cards that are going to drop on the board and ruin everybody's day, while also making certain that we are controlling the board and consistently refilling our hand so we can survive during every stage of the game. Now, how are we going to do that? Let's go ahead and talk about the most important part of the deck first. Awkwardly, it is the land base. I know, shocker, 5-colored deck has a land base that's important, but it's really important here because this is a gates-based land base. And I know there are a lot of people who have issues with gates because they come into play tapped 9 times out of 10. We've got ways to circumvent that. But I know normally starting with the mana isn't what we do, but again, it's very important here. So of course we've got every guild gate, right? Selesnya, guild gate. We've got Gruul, Azorius, Simic, Rakdos, Golgari, Dimir, Boros, Izzet, and so on. But also we have some gates like Gateway Plaza. Enters the battlefield tapped. You have to sack it unless you pay 1, but it is an Omni-land that allows us to get mana of any color. It's a bit slow in the beginning, but this is important for some of the other gates we have as well. We have a non-gate in the deck. In Great Hall of the Citadel, we can add 2 mana of any colors to cast a legendary spell by filtering any mana through it. That's going to be important as well because we need Omnath online as fast as possible. But we also happen to have Cliffgate, Heap Gate, and Black Dragon Gate, Gond Gate, and Baldur's Gate as the non-guild gates that are in the deck. Cliffgate and Heap Gate, or Cliffgate and Black Dragon Gate rather, are very, very simple. They come into play tapped, and they add a black mana of any color, and then like the Thriving Lands that we've used in previous decks, they allow us to choose any color other than the one that's on the card, and it can produce mana of that color alongside the mana that's on it. Now, the only reason that we're not running more of these gates is honestly for budgetary constrictions, and you'll see why in a second, why we desperately need every penny for some of the stuff we're going to be doing. We also have Heap Gate. We can filter and add 1 mana of any color, or we can tap an untapped gate we have to create a treasure token. This is a secondary way to store mana for later turns if we are in a position where we cannot get Omnath on the board to survive long enough. We also have Gond Gate, which is the second most important gate in the entire deck. This allows us to have all of our gates enter the battlefield untapped. Now, they are no different than any other non-searchable dual color land. This card is incredibly good at making our deck stop feeling like a budget deck and start feeling like a full power deck. But the spice is in Baldur's Gate, and normally a $1 land would be a bit out of the budget for a deck like this, but it's very important for this one. If you're familiar with Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, or cards like Gaia's Cradle that allow you to produce a ton of mana off of a single set of circumstances, whether it be devotion to a color or amount of creatures on the board. Baldur's Gate is the same thing, but with gates. And by the way, we have ways to clone our gates. So not only do we have the amount of gates that are in the deck, we also have the ability to create more gates. Baldur's Gate lets us create X mana of any one color, where X is the number of gates we control, but also, very important to note, Omnath allows us to store that mana forever. As long as we can keep Omnath on the board, all of the mana that we create with Gauntgate is going to just turn into black mana we hold on to for the entirety of the game. Now, the rest of the lands we have in the deck are going to be the usual suspects. We've got 2 of every basic. We have a Shire Terrace, we have Naya Panorama, Jund Panorama, Bant Panorama, Esper Panorama, Grixis Panorama. All of these lands allow us to sacrifice them and get any basic land from our deck. Promising Vein does the same thing. These lands will make sure that on the turns that we are not doing gate stuff, we are still getting the pieces of mana we need to play Omnath. Now, I know, again, starting with mana, not the usual thing we do, but it's very important for this kind of deck, so we're going to move on to the next part of very, very mana-centric cards, our tutor and selection pile. So, we have another bit of our budget, $1 of it. This is why we have not every gate available, but we have a crop rotation in the deck. Sack any land we have, search our library for any land, throw it onto the battlefield. You're using this to get Gauntgate or Baldur's Gate. Gauntgate first, so that your gates can now be fast mana, and Baldur's Gate so that your strategy can start running. Sylvan Scrying searches your library for any land, you put it in your hand. Gate Creeper Vine can search your library for any gate and put that in your hand. Ring Sight can be used to search your library for any card that shares a color with a legendary creature you have. So if we have Omnath out, we can use this to get out the District Guide, which can enter the battlefield and get any basic land card or gate card and put it in our hand. And then, of course, we have Rocco Cabaret Caterer. Rocco is an amazing piece of tech. This is a card that I honestly didn't know about until I was building CD8 Shalai and Halar, but Rocco is like a Finale of Devastation on a 3/1 body. When this card touches the board, for all the mana that you spent into X, you can search your library for any card with a mana value X or less and put it into the battlefield. So here's what we're going to be doing. Let's say that we've had a slow start and we get Omnath out a little late. Rocco is going to be able to come out basically for free, not counting his X cost, because he is a 3 mana creature. He has 3 mana pips in him. That means our Omnath is going to be able to create 3 differently colored mana, and then all we have to use is the land base that we have to filter into X. So we get 3 mana from Omnath, we pay 3 mana from our land base, and now suddenly we have District Guide out on the board automatically, and that is going to get whatever gate we need onto the battlefield, basically guaranteeing that our deck is going to start rocketing into the stratosphere in terms of speed and power. But we're not done with land-based cards yet. We even have a ramp section that is a little interesting. We have, first off, Blighted Burgeoning. This lets us incubate 2 and also makes a land tap for any mana of any kind, in addition to whatever mana it was already casting for, or whatever mana it was already tapping for. That's the one. So basically, we're going to use this, drop it on a land, create a blocker to give us a little bit of breathing room because we are so creature light in this deck, and the Blighted Burgeoning is going to always allow us to get the 1 extra mana pip we need for the variety of high-cost spells we have that have nothing but mana pips on them. So the type of mana we have access to is very, very important. Cormella Glamour Thief is also an interesting ramp piece. This deck is mostly instant and sorcery spells. So Cormella lets us get Grixis mana filtered to make that happen, but Cormella also, if she happens to die, she can get any of our instant and sorceries back from our graveyard to our hand. She is legendary, so if we clone her, we can automatically gain however many clones we created in Cormella's. We can gain that many instant and sorceries from our graveyard basically instantly, because, again, this card is legendary. If we have more than one of her on the board, she will self-destruct. Then we have Letter of Acceptance. It can grab us a mana of any color, and then we can sack it to draw a card if we don't need it anymore. Mere Convert, which is a 2-mana creature that can also let you pay 2 life to create mana of any color. We have the Invasion of Urgamon, which says that when it enters the battlefield, you get to create a treasure token, and then you get to loot, discard, and draw. And then when we flip it, it creates the Truga Cliff Charger. When it enters the battlefield, discard a card, and if you do, search your library for any land or battle card and put it into your hand. And yeah, you know exactly what we're going to be doing with this. If we manage to trigger this battle, it'll rarely happen. But if we do, not only is this giving us a treasure to give us that last pip of mana we need, this is just gonna go grab us Baldur's Gate. Every single time we have access to this card, it's just going to grab us Baldur's Gate. So we also have a Command Sphere for the same reason as Letter of Acceptance. It lets us draw cards. Explore lets us draw a card and then play an additional land. Navigation Orb allows us to get any 2 basic land or gate cards from our deck and put them on the battlefield. Honored Heirloom gives us another 3-mana rock that can also get rid of graveyards. I think every deck needs to have 1 to 2 ways to deal with graveyards consistently. Reanimation decks need to be kept honest. Explore the Underdark lets you search your library for 2 basic lands or gate cards. And then you take the Initiative, which lets you search for yet another basic land card on top of that as soon as this happens. And you get to put that card in your hand. If you cannot get Omnath out yet because you don't have the correct cards, Explore the Underdark will automatically get you the Gond Gate, the Baldur's Gate, and then whatever basic land you're missing for pips. This card is amazing for the deck. And at 13 cents, it fits really well into the budget. Growth Spiral also let us draw a card and put a land from our hand onto the battlefield at instant speed. So if we're holding up a counterspell, this is the card we can use at the end of the right player's turn. And then, of course, Ornithopter of Paradise, like Mirror Convert, is a 2-mana, add 1 mana of any color creature. Now, we have a lot of mana. We should probably be justifying all of that mana. But first, let's talk about the top deck ability of Omnath once again. This card's top deck ability is at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top card of your library, reveal it if it has 3 or more mana symbols and its mana cost. They can even be the same mana symbols. And if you do, add 3 mana of any color to your mana pool for the use in main phase 1. Now, this ability is important, but making sure that it activates is also important. So we have a variety of 3 mana costing cards that can make us get there. Sultai Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put any number of them in the grave and the rest back on top of your library in any order. Cabreri Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature or planeswalker, put it in your hand. If you don't, you may put it on the bottom of your library or back on top. This just lets us decide, oh, I happen to have a card I want. I'm gonna keep it and then get mana with Omnath. Oops. Titan's Nest, another 3 mana card that Omnath can trigger off of that says at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card in the graveyard. You may then exile a card from your graveyard at any point to add a colorless mana. Spend this mana only to cast colored spells without X in its mana costs. We're not going to be using that ability much. Mostly the Titan's Nest is going to be top deck manipulation. And then a weaker form of top deck manipulation we have is the Invasion of Ferulia. When it enters the battlefield, scry 3, reveal the top card. If it's a land or double-faced card, draw a card. We're basically just using this to make sure that the top deck is set up for when Omnath is going live. And also, this is going to get us a land earlier rather than later if it needs to. Now, speaking of lands, we do need to make sure that our lands are well supported, and we've got a few ways to do that. First of all is Green Side Watcher. This is part of our land synergy pile. The Green Side Watcher lets us untap any gate. So if we use Baldur's Gate to make a fuck ton of mana, the Green Side Watcher can then create a scenario where we get to use Baldur's Gate twice and get a ton more mana, all of it getting filtered into Omnath, and then of course, well, you'll see what it's for here in a second. Then Rebuild the City. We can choose a land and create 3 token clones of that land that are now 3/3 creatures that have Vigilance and Menace. This card is beautiful with Baldur's Gate. We use this on any of our non-legendary gates, and Baldur's Gate has 3 more gates automatically that it can feed into. And beautifully, Rebuild the City has 3 colored mana pips. So that means that our commander has everything that it needs. Then we have Arkelos, the Lagoon Mystic. Again, 3 mana pips, that's important. If it is tapped, other permanents come in tapped. If it is untapped, other permanents come into the battlefield untapped. So this will speed our opponents up a little bit if they are running a equally slow strategy, but we are going to benefit the most from our gates coming into play untapped. So hopefully this will give us what we want and not them. All hail Dirtle Turtle. The last card in our land synergy pile, though, is the most important one. This is Prismatic Omen. Lands we control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. Now, you may be wondering, why are we spending the budget on a Prismatic Omen, which is taking up a 15th of the deck's entire budget, when we could use something else like a Chromatic Lantern or any other cheaper ways to do this? Well, there's a reason for that. But again, I have to hold you guys in suspense. How are we going to be drawing cards to make sure that we can cast everything we want? Well, we have a decent draw package. Eureka Moment lets us get a land onto the battlefield and draw 2 cards. Divination lets us draw 2 cards. Sphinx's Insight lets us draw 2 cards. Facet Reader lets us discard cards to draw 2. Remember, we have ways to get our instants and sorceries back from the grave, so worst case scenario, we're throwing those away. And then Nine Fingers Keen, if it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 9 of our library, put a gate from among them onto the battlefield, and then if you control 9 or more gates, then you just get all the other cards to your hand. Most of the time, this is just going to get us a gate. Sometimes, in rare circumstances, this is going to give us every card that we care about in our deck. That's also kind of important. Oh, speaking of mana, just a little mana fixing card we have here. A Prophetic Prism. Comes into play, draws a card. We can use it to filter mana of any color. Again, this can help us set up for Omnath. This can help us make sure that our big mana spells that I keep on alluding to will be able to be cast later on down the road. We have one of those big mana spells here, though. This is Violent Ultimatum. We only have 2 cards in the deck that's only purpose is controlling things. But Violent Ultimatum, we can blow up 3 target permanents. We can also copy it while it's on the stack with some of our stuff we've got. This can help us clear out problem cards quick. Remember, it says any permanents. This can hit lands if we need it to. Endless Detour, we can basically take a spell or a non-land permanent and put the card on the top or bottom of an opponent's library. This card not only is a 3-mana card, so it works well with Omnath's abilities, but this allows us to basically have an easy access counterspell or a way to remove a problematic creature who's part of a combo. This does a lot of work for us. This card will guarantee in 9 times out of 10 that you are kept safe as long as you are holding the mana up to make sure this card is available. I keep talking about those other spells, though. So let's go ahead and get into one of the more densely packed sections of the deck, the charms and multi-spells. It's very hard for me to category what these are because they all are modal. They do a lot of things. So let's go ahead and start Obscure Charm for Esper. Return a multicolored permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Counter instant or sorcery spell, or blow up a creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. All different ways of destroying shit and protecting our stuff. Broker's Charm is for Bant. A creature gets 1/0 until end of turn. Doesn't really matter too much. We can also destroy an enchantment or draw 2 cards. This also works as a fight spell. That's the other part of that first effect, so we can use this to make Omnath just crash into a planeswalker over and above whatever creatures they're trying to use to defend it. Riveteer's Charm. For Jund, target opponent sacks a creature or planeswalker they control with the highest mana value, or you can exile the top 3 cards of your library and play any of those until your next end step, so Impulse Draw, or exile a person's graveyard. Again, keep reanimation decks honest. Cabretti Confluence, choose 3, you can choose the same one more than once. For Naya and 3, create a token that's a copy of a creature you control, it gains haste. So we can use this to just create 3 copies of Cormella and just get 3 instants and sorceries back from our grave. That's a strategy we have access to. We can also use it to exile an artifact or enchantment. That's important. Or we can make creatures and opponent controls get 1/1 and first strike until end of turn. Most of the time, we're not going to use that one, but it's a funny politics move when the elf player swings at a person you don't like, they don't quite have game, and you go, No. I have Cabaret Confluence, and if it weren't a sorcery, I could have helped you. And you just get to stare at them. Just make the elf player mad. Just be like, hey, read this card. Just don't look at that sorcery part of the card. Abzan Charm. Also, this for, again, Abzan lets us exile the creature with power 3 or greater. You can draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, or you can put 2 1/1 counters on 2 creatures. Last mode's not super important. First 2 modes are great. Bant Charm, we can blow up an artifact, or we can put a creature on top, bottom of its owner's library, or counter an instant spell. This card will get us out of a lot of bad situations. Sultai Charm. Destroy a monocolored creature, destroy any artifact or enchantment, or draw 2, discard 1. There's no bad modes on this thing. Obscura Confluence. Again, choose 3. You may choose the same one more than once. One creature loses all abilities and has base power toughness 1/1. This is a way to make sure that a combo piece on the board just suddenly stops working for the turn that it needs to. We can make a creature connive, not super important. The most important part of this spell, though, for us, we can make a creature card go from our graveyard back to our hand. So, let's say that we have Omnath in the grave and we're having to spend buku mana for it because it's got a lot of commander tax. This is a way to make sure that we can avoid that. We can also use it to get back any of our creatures that do things like untapping gates or searching for more gates. We can just use this to accelerate our own plan very, very quickly. We also have Drummer's Charm. We can choose one of these modes, gain 5 life, counter any spell, or give a creature -2/-2. We can use this to get rid of indestructible creatures like Toski, or we can use this to basically counter anything. Those are the 2 modes we care about on this. Riveteer's Confluence for Jund and 2. Choose 3 like every other Confluence spell. Draw 1, lose 1. Deal 1 damage to each creature and planeswalker you don't control, or put a land from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So let's go ahead and say we're in a situation where somebody blows up our Gone Gate or our Baldur's Gate, and we need those cards for our deck to work. We are using the Riveteer's Confluence to get those cards back. Or somebody has a big board of elves, we are using this to wipe them out. Or let's say that we are spent, we've used all of our resources, then this is just going to be a simple draw 3 spell for us. Maestro's Confluence lets us take any monocolored instant or sorcery from our graveyard, put it back to our hand, give a creature -3/-3, or goad each creature target player controls. So there's a few things we can do with this, huh? We can use this to just goad the entire table and sit back while they beat each other senseless and not us during a turn cycle. Or we can use this to make sure that our important pieces are back in our hand, or we can use it as a removal spell. This card is beautiful. And then finally, Teamer Charm. A creature gets 1/1 until end of turn and then fights. It's another way to kill cards. We can counter a spell unless they pay 3, so this is a mana leak. Or we can make it to where creatures with power 3 or less can't block this turn. So this one's important. Let's say the big Dino Stompy player is over here, and you want to make a friend, and he's swinging over at the elf player or the goblin player. They've got a ton of tokens. They're like, yeah, I can jump block for days. I don't care. Cool. You activate Teamer Charm, and you sit back and look at the elf player and go, not today. No. The dinos are going to run over the forest. We are going to let it happen. We are burning trees today. I don't have a problem with elf players, by the way. I just really like making them the butt of the jokes because I grew up as an elf player. Anyway, we'll make an elf deck next as a way to make up for my sins. Speaking of blowing up everything the elf players love, we have 2 good board wipes. We have Gates Ablaze. We deal X damage to all creatures where X is the number of gates we control, and then Iridian Maelstrom will destroy all creatures that aren't all colors. Again, this has enough pips to make Omnath do work. But I've alluded to the big spells long enough. Let's go ahead and just talk about those now. So, we have Crackling Perimeter. This card says we can tap any untapped gate we control and deal 1 damage to every opponent. So every gate that we've been building up over the game, when we are at the last turn before our turn pops up, we just tap them and burn everybody for probably about 9-10 damage. Then we take our turn, and then we pass, and we just hold up all those instants and sorceries I told you about. And if nobody stops us, we just tap our gates and burn more cards. Or burn more people. Speaking of burning people, Unite the Coalition. Choose 5. You may choose the same one more than once. Make a permanent phase out. Draw a card. Exile a player's graveyard. Deal 2 damage to any target or blow up an artifact or enchantment. This lets us do so much. I'm not even going to explain it. It's all written on the card. Exile everybody's graveyard and draw 2. Phase out your Omnath during a board wipe. Phase out your lands from a board wipe. You've got the one player who's just a cheeky Armageddon player. You just go, yeah, no, I don't care about that. This does work. Just try it. The card's bonkers for 19 cents. Inspired Ultimatum. Target player gains 5 life, and then it deals 5 damage to any target, and then you draw 5. Meeting of the 5. Exile the top 10 cards of your library. This card is beautiful. Exile 10. You may cast anyone with exactly 3 colors among them, which is most of our deck, and then you can get Wooburg twice. Spend this mana to cast those spells with exactly 3 colors. This card is one of our win conditions, because if we don't have a way to close out the game in those top cards that we pull out, then we've probably done something wrong. Speaking of closing out the game, there's one card that has exactly 3 colors that matters for this card. We want to use this as well as other methods to cast Cruel Ultimatum lots of times. Make a person sack a creature, make them discard 3 cards, then they lose 5 life, then you get a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, then you draw 3 cards, then you gain 5 life. This is not a fair card. This is not fairness printed on a Magic the Gathering card. There's nothing fair about Cruel Ultimatum. You just play it and you laugh, and we have ways to abuse it, and you'll see. And then we have 2 of our actual win cons. Not cards that dig for win cons, not cards that get people closer to death, but 2 of our actual win cons. Do you remember a while ago, we talked about a little card called Prismatic Omen? All the lands we are ramping out at lightning speed are every basic land type. Well, that's because I have a card called Last Stand in this deck. Target opponent loses 2 life for every swamp you control, deals damage equal to the number of mountains you control to target creature, put a green sapperling into play for every forest you control, gain 2 life for every plains you control, and draw a card for every island you control, and then discard that many cards from your hand. Now, we have ways of copying this, so this is one of our 2 ways of just going, the game's over, I win. It does a lot. The last way we have to close out games, though, is this lovely card called Debt to the Deathless. Each opponent loses twice X life, and then you gain life equal to the life lost this way. This card, without any way to copy it, just closes out games. All the mana that you've been storing with Omnath goes right into that X cost, and then you sit back and laugh maniacally. And if it gets countered, I don't know how many ways I've told you there are to get instants and sorceries back from the grave, but there's enough to make this worth it. This will win games when you cast it, or it will get people to such a manageable life total that Omnath can just jelly bomb them. But how are we going to be copying these cards? We have charms with lots of really good modal abilities, and then we have these ways of closing out the game. Sometimes we don't have the mana to just get there. How are we going to make that happen? Well, we have a lovely card called Teach by Example in our very robust copies section. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Pretty straightforward. Twin Inferno's the same way. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell, copy the spell, choose new targets. Double cast, same idea. Copy a spell. All of these are ways to copy our big spells once or our charms once, and then repeated reverberation lets us copy those cards twice. So, fun fact, you can just go, yeah, I'm going to cast repeated reverberation and also cast Debt to the Deathless. Yeah, I'm paying less mana into the X, but I'm copying it 3 times, so you take 6 times X in damage. Let's say you're only paying like 5 into Debt to the Deathless. That's 30 damage. And that's 90 life you're gaining. You become the problem nigh instantly. Also, threefold signal. Any card you have that's exactly 3 colors, you can pay 3 mana to just copy it. We have a lot of 3 mana cards in the deck, so suddenly our charms aren't saying draw 2, they're saying draw 4. Suddenly Cruel Ultimatum isn't saying 1 person gets cucked. It's saying 2 people get cucked and you're the villain. But how do we copy cards permanently? Well, we got Double Vision, your first inner sorcery you cast each turn. Note, each turn, not each of your turns. You get to copy. That pretty straightforward. Just copy our big spells. Swarm Intelligence, copy any instant or sorcery we play. Just more copies. What if you want to copy your cards that copy cards? What if you want copies for your copies? Moria to the Frost is a fun clone that lets us copy any card at all we have that is a permanent. So we can use this to copy an important gate. We can use this to copy Double Vision or Swarm Intelligence. We can use this to copy any of our cards that we really, really want on the board doing their thing. Moria to the Frost is a beautiful clone, and oh, by the way, he's pipped exactly the way that Omnath wants him to be pipped, because Omnath doesn't need 3 mana of different colors. He just needs 3 mana pips. He's just going to take this and turn it into jelly. And you are going to slurp that jelly, and the jelly will give victory. I don't know what allegory I'm going for there. Huh, maybe I should end the video sometime soonish. Anywho, that's Omnath, Locus of all for $15. This deck is bonkers. This is a big, dirtily spell-slingy deck. I remember when Wizards of the Coast released the Is It Precon for Strixhaven, it was somewhere between a Storm deck and a big, dirtily spell deck, and I really wanted it to be big, dirtily spells. Omnath lets us actually have that big, dirtily spell deck that I always wanted, and it does a beautiful job at it. It draws us the cards, it gives us all the mana we could ever want to cast it, and it makes sure that it's not super hard to cast, because we can just pay Phyrexian mana into its black, so it just costs 4 mana to pull out. Card's beautiful. The deck is fun as hell. I built it for my partner, and I watched her just go off with this deck multiple times at locals last night. So, if you want to try Big Dirtily Spellslinger and you've wanted to do it on a very cheap budget, the final price tally for this deck ended up being $14.96, including the commander. This is very, very, very affordable. Anywho, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed recently. We got a recent jump in them, and I am thrilled to have all of you here. With all that said, hopefully you will be here for the next deck tech we're going to be doing for $15. And as always, everybody, insert end video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitta, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.